big one.
Look at all of a sudden here.
What you say now, that's it. The government can hear you.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, I take 5,000 IUs a day of vitamin D. They check my blood for D, and I just got a call back before I got here. They said your vitamin D level was terribly low.
What? God, Mike.
I said, really? I take 5,000 IUs a day.
Wow, that's quite a bit.
Yeah, I thought so too. I
Yeah.
thought it was almost too much.
Yeah, I think,
Yeah,
I'm thinking what mine is I take a supplement to that in the winter time, and I think I take 3,000.
yeah,
Vitamin D, is that what you get from the sun?
Yeah,
that kind of surprised me.
Yeah, there's much sun in the winter time.
no, but you get it from, if you drink milk and, even like a lot of the breads and stuff are enriched with it, they add it, you know, so you get a bunch of sources.
I think about the only natural source you can get through is salmon, like fatty fish, I think they might have.
Yeah, that sounds right.
And I eat a lot of salmon.
Yeah.
I don't know why I do long vitamin D. She asked me, how are you? Your joints hurt, your muscles ache, are you tired all the time? Like you run out of energy quicker than you used to on a project? It's like, yeah.
You're just getting old. Isn't that all of us?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a stupid question.
Yeah.
I said, I must be more vitamin D than that.
Jeez.
Yeah.
Huh. Yeah, my joints ache. I get tired all the time.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah.
A lot quicker than I used to. Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
It seems like it's for me, not last November, but a year ago, last November, I got COVID. It hit me really hard for about 3 weeks. Then I ended up with blood clots in my lungs out of the
Oh,
COVID.
man.
And I just have not rebounded since. You know, I used to come out here and just tear these trails up on a mountain bike. Shoot, I can't hardly go for a hard walk anymore, you know, without letting out wind.
Yeah. I'm looking at the computer because Sandra Larson on this one. And then, should I think what?
We've got some light flashing up there.
Yeah, we were experimenting with it when we had the board meeting last time. We kind of lost the audio when we shared screen,
Right,
so we
yep.
were messing with that today to try to figure that out. I think we got it figured out. There was one person in here, one person on a computer in the office, one person on a phone in the back, you know, trying to be different people.
Scott's not.
No, he's at a education conference in
Oh, yeah, that's right,
Madison.
because he's on the Board of Education down at Kickapoo.
I thought he was gonna join via Zoom, but I'm not sure. He said he was, if he remembers.
So I guess we got another meeting Thursday.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Badger's gonna beat Northwestern tonight.
Better.
I know, we got that nice high ranking now.
Yeah, it's like they're getting.
When I see
they're
that,
getting built up,
oh,
they're getting backed up.
every time you put them up there on this pedestal,
Yeah.
somebody like Northwestern comes along and
Yeah.
slaps you in the face.
It's just like putting a little bit on outside. Yeah,
Is there 8? Yeah.
well, they've been playing all pretty good.
They've been playing good competition. They
Yeah.
just beat garbage.
Right, yeah.
Purdue, Ohio State,
Yeah.
Illinois. Right? Illinois?
Yeah.
And Illinois gave Purdue all they wanted yesterday.
Yeah.
2 overtimes, I think.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's gonna be quite a tournament this year.
Yeah, well, but Northwestern beat Michigan State.
Did they?
Saturday, and their Michigan State fan was ranked,
Holy buckets.
and Northwestern knocked them and led the whole game.
Wisconsin's only favored by just a hair.
Yeah.
It's at Northwestern.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's gonna be interesting.
Hey, Jake, did you get my questions here? No, what's the reserves philosophical position? What's the collective will of the stewardship practices of the land? Do we have anything defined?
Well, that might be in our land management for our regular management plan.
So
Maybe not, no,
this is Russell or entomologist.
Yep.
Yeah.
Good.
Russell, can you hear us okay?
I sure can. Can you guys all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
Okay. I heard you guys all talking about Iowa State playing Texas Tech tonight and that you were pulling for the Cyclones. I only say that because I have a degree from that place and every now and again I watch them and pay attention.
Hi, Susan, can you hear us okay?
Yep, hi.
We got anyone else yet?
AJ is supposed to be coming on and Sandra Larson.
Okay, so I'll wait a few more minutes then.
AJ might show up as Julie.
Was Scott gonna join? Remotely?
He didn't tell me what it was. Oh, yeah, I said he would try. We had a problem with the link. Sent out the wrong one first and did a new one, so.
Yeah, I saw that. That was maybe some people missed that. And they were trying to get on with the other one. It's not working.
Yeah, normally it would work, but it kept popping up for us invalid links, so. Try it again.
We did a new one.
Well, I did get your email about the new link, so.
Yeah, I did too, but you know, if somebody.
You did mess.
Seeing it.
Oh, right.
Tried that other one, they would not be getting anywhere with it.
But they should have to access their email to get to the first one, so that's, they'd see the second,
Yeah.
you think. But you never know.
I think we need to do any introductions.
Yeah.
Yeah. Did hear from at least Ken Croninger is probably gonna be here around 6.
Okay.
So. I didn't hear much from any of the other farmers.
Yeah, they've been at the other meetings pretty hot and heavy.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm surprised I didn't hear from them, but doesn't mean they're not coming, just.
Well, I think we will get started here. I will call the meeting to order. If we have some other people join in as we get going here, that's good, but
Here's
I think
David.
we'll get started. On our agenda tonight, I think I will skip forward to item 3, and that is having UW entomology professor Russell Groves join us. Thank you for joining us here, Mr. Groves. I'm Dick Wallen of the Land Management Committee here. So I understand that you have some information to present to us and that you could answer some questions we might have.
I think you're muted.
Here we go. There you go.
Yes, sir. I got that. Thank you. And I appreciate the invite, and I'm happy to have that conversation. This kind of started maybe 2 weeks ago. Ashley Olson, just to give you a little backstory, Ashley wrote to me there at UW asking me if I had, detailed information on seed treatment uses in, field crops. And I kind of said, well, what kind of information? And she basically said, all you got. And I said, oh, okay. So anyway, I had a little bit then more email correspondence with Doug. And is Doug there with you tonight?
Not there, Russell.
All right, so I got to visit with Doug. And then I had a chance to visit this afternoon with Jason. Is Jason there tonight? All right, there's Jason. All right. So, and when I very first talked to Doug and he wrote to me, he said, well, if you've got a message that you'd like to offer, have a conversation, you can maybe introduce yourself and tell us what you do. And then, then we can, follow up and maybe have some conversation. And I'm certainly happy to do that. So what I might ask, I put together a presentation that I'm hoping is not going to last. I'll go through it very quick. I won't try to make it more than 10 minutes. And you're all very welcome to have a copy of this presentation if you'd like it. I mean, for what it might be worth to you. In order to share that, I think somebody has to make me a host or a co-host on this meeting. And then I can share my presentation.
Yep, I have it open, so it's open sharing. You should be able to do that.
All right, very good. Well, right now for me, it says host disabled participant screen sharing. So if on the participants, if you highlight my name and go to more, you should be able to make me a co-host.
Yep, I just switched it, but try it once.
Okay. You bet. Now it looks like it's wanting to do it. So can you all give me a thumbs up or something and let me know if you can see on the screen the first slide? Excellent.
Okay.
All right. Well, so yes, I'm a professor of entomology here at UW. I'm also the chairman of the department right now. And I'm an extension research split there at UW, 60-40 split research extension. And I thought I'd just tell you a little about our lab, because that's probably the easiest way for you to kind of get to know me. The folks across the top here are the grad students or at least in entomology in my lab. Megan, who's in the upper left, actually works on neonics that are neonic contaminants in central Wisconsin groundwater. And we'll talk a little about her work. Vicki is the middle. Vicki is a PhD student that is working on how insects might influence the persistence of foodborne illness, like when we get salmonellosis and stuff like that off of fresh produce coming from California. She's working on that. Chris Bloom on the right is a PhD student who's looking at rootworm resistance and patterns of rootworm resistance in Wisconsin. The folks across the bottom are basically research scientists that are in my lab that also help me and help the students. Scott and Ben and Linda, and these are the folks in entomology. I'm also a graduate trainer, or what we call an affiliate faculty, in plant pathology and agroecology. I've got a PhD student, actually two, that are in plant path. One, the gentleman Matt Pereira on the left, he works on agricultural data sets, trying to look at large data sets like those that are generated off of field and forage crops. And and tries to understand, patterns of pest prevalence. Shannon works on an insect transmitted pathogen in carrots called Aster yellows. She's also a PhD student. Erin is in the lower left is a PhD student in agroecology. Erin works on non-honeybee pollinators that are in off-crop amendments, and in particular in our pickling cucumber industry up in the central part of the state. And then Ari, or Ariana, is in the lower right. Ari is the new master student in our program, and Ari is actually working on some new funding that we have with the Wisconsin Organic Research Consortium. And Ari's working on the development of disease models. So that's probably the best way to help you understand a little bit of the stuff that goes on in our lab, is for me to let you know what the students in my lab do. I'm just the one out there begging for money. They're the ones that are doing all the work. This is another aspect of what we do. We do a fair amount of applied research trials. You can go to our website. Hopefully at least one or two of you will go to my website and click on it. That'll increase my Google hits for the month. But anyhow, you could look at our field trials results. It's under research, and you can see that, yes, in fact, we do a fair amount of work with the neonics, and historically have. Again, mostly in vegetables, because that's what I work in, our vegetable crops. So just real quick, this is probably a refresher for all of you. The neonics were developed, well, the neonics were discovered in the 40s and 50s. They were really never fully developed and formally released and registered until the 90s. Usually, imidacloprid, which was the first one, was registered in 94, and thiamethoxam and clothianidin, two more neonics, were registered in the years to follow that in 96. They were sort of promised as safer alternatives to the, carbamates and organophosphates. They're water soluble and systemic, which means they're, in the ground, they'll go into the water, go into solution, and then plant roots will take them up and translocate them, throughout a plant, in the vascular system of a plant. And that, of course, is what makes them, attractive to people, is because not only will some of it will stay in the soil, but it'll move up and provide protection in a plant. But I'll also say that this group of insecticides is now the largest single group of pesticides that are registered on the planet. They comprise 25% of the global market. I mean, it's huge. It's a lot. These pictures here just show you from 2003 on the left, 2006, and now to 2009, and we have not changed appreciably since 2009, sort of the distribution of the neonic uses. You can see that they have just really increased substantially. And this is for thiamethoxam, one that you all may have heard of as Cruiser as a seed treatment. And then you can see in the figure below, I don't know if you can see it really well, but the predominant uses are as seed treatments in corn and soybeans, the green and yellow bars. Vegetables definitely will use them, but you can see they basically track the corn belt as far as their uses. So they're used extensively. I can also tell you that, when we go back into the around the time of issues with respect to bee disappearance and colony collapse disorder and other issues, where folks that are managing hives are starting to see issues and starting to link it to the presence or prevalence or the widespread use of the neonics. Even our US EPA said this is truly going to be a huge issue. And it is. And the neonics probably do play some role in pollinator disappearance, but we're also learning that they're are other issues that are linked, to pollinator disappearance or, bee declines as well. But just want you to know that EPA knew that. I mean, fast forward a couple of years from when Jim Jones made those statements, you just Google neonics, and these were the first, 6 screens. I put this slide together now 6 or 7 years ago, and this is what you'd get. I mean, you just get a wide variety of comments about, a commentary on neonics and its influence on bees. So there's no question, that in science and in the, in the press, there are some questions about their impacts. Those questions were so prevalent that EPA, in fact, fast-tracked the re-registration of those insecticides. They weren't really due for re-registration until 2022 of this year. But because the public was so concerned, they actually put them in re-registration all the way back in 2014. And it took 5 years before they were reviewed. Normally, re-registration only takes a couple years, but in 2020, January 30th of 2020, an interim, decision was released. EPA didn't really modify too many of the uses for the neonics, and the chemical companies, would have probably celebrated that as a success. But there's no question that the re-registration was the result of, a lot of people questioning it. It's also about that time, in the mid-teens, up to more contemporary times, that a lot of different entities and organizations were starting to realize that neonics are being found very widespread in a variety of different places, not the least of which is in a lot of our surface and groundwater. And so we unfortunately see that here in Wisconsin. As I mentioned, that forms a part of what one of our graduate students works on. In fact, it's become so prevalent that the Department of Ag, Trade and Consumer Protection has put the neonics inside of NR 140, which is our groundwater legislation, and we're currently in cycle 10. And there are proposals in place to make significant revisions, on the allowable enforcement standards for these compounds. So the Department of Ag is paying close attention. And this isn't a federal decision. This is a state decision. The state is thinking about this. And I've got highlighted in blue here, really what the department is really focusing on. And these are again, the enforcement standards and the preventative action limits in part per billion for imidacloprid. In many parts of the state, we're well above these kinds of detection thresholds now in surface and groundwater. And part of the reason they're implementing this or proposing to implement this is because of some relatively recent human health studies that do implicate these low doses with patterns of fat metabolism in mammals. So you and I, potentially as well. So again, these are just some of the things that are ongoing right now. The department is considering. And again, I mentioned these 3 neonics like imidacloprid, thiamethoxam, clothianidin. So the state is proposing definitely changing imidacloprid, changing the preventative action limit for thiamethoxam. It was 20 micrograms per liter. Now they're adjusting it to 10, and they're not proposing any changes for clothianidin. But this is all captured in cycle 10. And if you want to read about it, you could go to that link that's on that page and see. There's no question we have vulnerability in the state. We have groundwater areas, or we have areas in the state where we've got a lot of groundwater contamination. In the past 5 or 6 years, we've actually worked with the growers themselves, especially high capacity grower wells. There's mostly our vegetable producers. And we've been trying to, ascertain the presence or prevalence. And I'll not call out any individual farms here, but I mean, you can see down here in the lower left, this is lower Wisconsin River Valley, Madison's right here. And And then, this is the central sands. This is, of course, where we grow most of our processing vegetables. And you can see here, there's some farm level variation, but these are the detects of one of the neonics, thiamethoxam, that we're seeing in operating pivots. I mean, this is the water coming out of the ground. And we see the presence of these compounds, and we see them vary across, farms. It's probably not linked to the farm itself. It's probably actually linked to, how far away from the moraine that these people are, and the depth of water that's being sampled. But I just offer this to you just to let you know that this is some of the stuff we've been working on. You also have to know that in the same areas, a lot of the drainage ditches or a lot of the drains that are cut through the central sands are all groundwater fed. When it rains in the central sand, water doesn't go over, it goes into the sand, and then all of the streams up there are fed by groundwater. So it stands to reason if the operating pivots, are having these detectable levels that, most of our, most of these streams contain these levels as well. And sure enough, this is an illustration this is some of Megan's work, the young lady I was pointing to earlier. These are just some of the detection levels that we see in these different stream systems. Again, right up here is Stevens Point, right at the top of the map up here. I suppose the dells are right down here. This would be Castle Rock and Petenwell and so forth. Right here's the divide, as you know. I mean, this water runs into the Fox, and that drains out into Lake Michigan, and that drains out, of course, into the St. Lawrence River. And this water here, of course, drains into the Wisconsin, which goes into the Mississippi, which goes out, in Louisiana. So, and you can see over here, there's nowhere near the same amount of detects. But of course, in this part of the state, it's a different soil type, right? I mean, it's more the Ripon Plain, and it's not the sand. This is the central sands up here. And remember, these insecticides are water soluble, and they'll move through that sand really quick. Okay, then the last thing I'll tell you about is, this is just sort of an FYI, and you may not care that much about that, but anyhow, one of the insects that we battle in potatoes is the Colorado potato beetle. And Colorado potato beetle, it generates resistance to all kinds of insecticides, and it's already generated resistance to the neonics. So what we've been trying to do is learn about that resistance. We've been trying to determine what the actual genes are that are involved. And these are the different pathways that the insects could develop resistance. They could have behavioral resistance where they avoid stuff in the lower right. There could be an actual genetic substitution at a binding site. Some insects actually excrete more thickening in their cuticle, in their skin, to actually keep the insecticides from getting inside. What we're seeing more of is the upper left, and that is detoxification enzymes. It's the same stuff, and it's the enzymes in the gut of the insect that are getting overexpressed. And we do this by a process called RNA sequencing, and we look at the number of transcripts. And I'm just highlighting here a cytochrome P450 and an ABC transporter and a glutathione transferase. And you're all thinking, why in the world are you telling us this, Russ? Anyway, I'm just telling you, these are the genes that the insect is expressing to try and cope with a neonic. And then what we're doing is actually developing what we call RNAi technologies. If we know what genes are involved with resistance, we can knock those genes out using double-stranded RNA. And that's what we do here is we've developed, the one gene that seems to be the most overexpressed is the one highlighted here, this 6K1 cytochrome P450. And what we do is we create a double-stranded version of that gene in the form of RNA, and we feed it to Colorado potato beetles. And in so doing, it actually suppresses the function of that gene. And this is called RNA interference. If you've read about it anywhere, you've probably heard more about CRISPR lately than you have RNA interference. But anyway, what we're doing is knocking out these genes. And the only reason I show you this slide here is to just show you that at 10 nanograms per microliter, the concentration of this CYP61 gene knockout, we can actually recover susceptibility. We can knock the resistance out, which on the one hand, I think is kind of fun and cool. All right, that's enough of that science. I just brought that stuff to you today, and these are the people that have helped us fund this work. I bring this presentation to you just, because Doug and others had said, hey, Russ, do you know what a neonic is? How would we know you know what a neonic is? How could we trust your judgment or your ideas on this? So that was basically just my 10, 15 minute talk on what we do. And so I'm happy to spend a moment and talk with you and answer questions, about this. I'll start by saying that in my conversations with both Doug and also Jason, mention a couple things. One is, those seed treatments are generally in corn and in beans are not necessary. I mean, the actual insect pests, that are prevalent, in the corn or soybean crop are not so prevalent and so numerous that you can't go along, without them. In fact, probably in, 9 out of 10 years, you could go along and you won't, have an issue. So my point there is you can do it. I mean, you can probably talk to your leasee and ask them to consider, trying to grow this crop without a neonic. The challenge that I think you'll face primarily in corn in particular, to a lesser extent in soybeans, but in corn in particular, at least what the leasee will face is that they probably will really have a hard time finding a hybrid that they're comfortable with growing that doesn't come with these neonic seed treatments. Now, that doesn't mean you can't, and I think when I talked with Jason today, I think he'd mentioned that, this coming year, the leasee has already made, some commitments on sourcing seed and I guess maybe you all made the decision that for this year, they're going to be able to put, what seed they want in the ground, in the ground on that, 600 plus acres that they're farming. But in the future, you're asking the question, can they get along without it? I say you can get along without it, but again, finding that seed on a hybrid that the people that are leasing this ground are probably going to want to put in the ground is going to be tough. You can ask. And remember that the neonic is only one part of what is on a seed treatment. You're going to have fungicides as also as part of a seed treatment package on most of those hybrids. And then another thing you can consider is there's 2 loading rates of neonics on most field corn. There's 1250 and 500, I think 500 gram per 100 weight of seed loading rate. So you could use a lower loading rate as one option. But anyway, so I'll stop there and again say that you don't really need them, but again, you might just be challenged, to find, seed at that your current leasee folks might use. So maybe I'll stop here for a minute and see if there's questions.
I got a question, Russell, just on the point that you're talking about right now. Is there enough, I don't want to say pressure, but maybe just enough media coverage on the neonics right now that's going to force some of the seed corn companies to have to provide a product like this for their growers?
So there is a lot of conversation and discussion and press and media about, you know, the negative aspects of the neonics, and the registrants, the major global registrants are trying to find alternatives, you know, for that. There are some alternatives right now. I talked with our previous field and forage crops person, Brian Jensen, just night before last, or was it last night? Maybe it was last night. Anyhow, a couple of those would be some newer, what we call diamide insecticides that are less toxic, certainly don't have impacts on pollinators and as many off-crop insects. You would maybe learn about them as either Lumivia is the name of, like, the trade name, like Cruiser is the trade name of thiamethoxam, one of the neonics. So you might hear of Lumivia and you might hear of Fortenza. And I mentioned these two names to Doug the other day, but I also mentioned it to Brian, and Brian said, these registrants don't have a lot of seed right now in terms of stocks and availability with those, just because there's not that big of a push. I mean, there is some push, but he said if, you know, you'd want to start talking to your seed man now, if you wanted to, you know, find it. So the registrants are trying to think about putting insecticides, you know, on there that are non-neonics. You should, though. I mean, I think that if you can get the leasees to do it, you can ask them to try and talk to their seed man, you know, with a sufficient, you know, we're 14, 16 or 14, 15 months in advance of the 2023 growing season, and see if, you know, if they're getting it from Wiffle, or if they're getting it from Channel or Rank, or, you know, whomever, you know, they've felt good about their hybrid. You could see, you know, how much success they can have in pulling that, in getting that neonic off. Even if it doesn't have Lumivia or Fortenza on it, you really don't need those insecticides. In all seriousness, the threat of early season seed corn maggot, the threat of wireworm, the threat of white grubs and rootworm below ground, you know, in Wisconsin is pretty low. And, you know, even if you can just get them to give you a seed treatment, you know, without a neonic, is a possibility. So you could ask. Remember too, though, those compounds, those materials are as seed treatments were put on traded corn, right? I mean, these corns are, when I say traits, I mean they have GM traits, you know, genetic modifications, right? So they're probably either a Roundup Ready, you know, traded corn, or a Liberty Link traded corn, and they probably have a BT that's being expressed above ground for corn borer, and they probably have a unique BT that's being expressed below ground for rootworm. You know, so those are all of these are probably traded, you know, and that's what I mean when I say traded corn. They have these GM traits. I mean, if you said you wanted to go without, not only you wanted to knock the seed treatments off, but you wanted to get rid of all those traits, and you wanted to go back to, you know, a non-GM corn, I don't know what your leasees might say. Those guys might say that's not the kind of stuff, we just don't grow that. And they may not accept your lease or, your lease option. Now, if you've got people in the area that, new people that want to take on those responsibilities, that's okay. But, and there would be, there'd be definitely some considerations to think about if you went totally away from not only the seed treatment. If you can source it, the leasee's not going to suffer that much. But if you move away from traded corn, there'll be some risk. There'll definitely be some late season risk for, western bean cutworm, corn borer, and rootworm. And then whoever's growing that is probably going to have to be thinking about ways to remediate that risk.
Which would be what, Russell?
Hold on just a second, if you don't mind. Okay, say that again.
So you said they would be looking to remediate the risks. By what practice would they remediate the risks?
Well,
Are you talking about coming in with some alternative sprays?
probably. I mean, that's what the GM corn does, is it keeps a grower off the field. You don't have an ear spray for earworm or corn borer. You don't have or for western bean cutworm. And rootworm below ground, you wouldn't spray for rootworm below ground, but if you didn't have a trait, and it depends also on what your history of rootworm is in those places, but you might have to put an insecticide, a formal type of an insecticide in the ground. If you told me, oh no, we've never had rootworm issues and we don't, and okay, then maybe you can get away without a rootworm, without the rootworm insecticide. But and in your country, I've come out, for example, I was telling Jason this, that I do some work with, or I have done work in the past with, folks there in Lafarge, with Organic Valley, and with the produce auction, and it's county agent there, Bill Halfman in Monroe County, and Tim Rabine before Ashley was there. And you got a lot of good diverse ag and diverse like produce growers in that area, and you got a lot of organics in that area, and you got a lot of Amish in that area, and your Amish community doesn't use GM corn, at least not much, I don't believe. And you do have a fair number of corn borer in that area. For that reason, just because there's a lot of refuge. So I'm saying that there's the potential for any leasee, if you told them, hey, we want you to consider getting away from all of these components, your leasee, if they want to make whatever their yield target is. I don't know I guess I don't know what to expect out there. Are you doing really good if you're making 190 bushels?
In this area?
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be a very good deal.
Very good. And I'm just assuming your yield, that or maybe 170, 190. You might be pushing that down a little bit. I wouldn't know what to say, maybe 20%, but that kind of 20% might be the margin that somebody might make. So, those are some of the challenges, I guess, I would see. I did mention this to Jason today. Remember, these neonics, again, they put them on the seed when they go in the ground and there's free water in the ground, or when it rains or whatever, that material solubilizes and it moves up, right? I mean, it gets taken up by the roots of the plant and it moves up in the plant, whether it's in a young soybean or a young corn plant. But it only lasts at most 25 days, 30 days, as far as above ground protection. So, I mean, if you were thinking you were getting a little bit of flea beetle protection, or you were thinking you're getting, which we don't have much for corn flea beetle, or if you were thinking you were getting, protection from like cutworm, like black cutworm or variegated cutworm flights, the neonics don't do anything to caterpillar larvae anyway. But my point is that those neonics are only in there for, again, 25, 30 days. I mean, if you're planting on April 20th, by May 20th, they're gone. Well, shouldn't say they're gone. There'll still be some in the ground. Unfortunately, like we were talking about, they're going to leach. They're going to leach slower, probably in a mineral soil like you're in. I mean, if some of those bottoms out there around the river are sandy bottoms, which inevitably they are, you might have some leaching in that way. But I mean, my goodness, it's cat's out of the bag on all this, right? These neonics are everywhere. I mean, these neonics are in every river system, across the Midwest. That's why I showed you that one slide, about USGS and so many other places, realizing it. So anyway, I be careful I don't get distracted too much. So they only going to give you 30 days of control, and then they don't give you full season control of anything. And I actually think the registrants oversell it as a rootworm material. They'll tell you, oh, well, you get a zone of protection around that seed for maybe as much as 35 or 40 days for rootworm. I don't know about that. I mean, you got to have real high rootworm pressure for rootworm numbers to be that problematic in late May. That's why you buy the traded corn that you do, that expresses that BT below ground and is killing rootworm.
Okay, I have a question. It seems to me that this original discussion was about the neonics, and I'm understanding the difficulties the farmers have with trying to cut a path through all these decisions. I'm interested in not necessarily going with removing all traded corn and all the different things that can be done to the corn. I think we might be better off by just focusing on the neonics and the pre-treated situation than trying to push the farmer into an extreme position that, they're giving up all the protections they might think they have in this manipulated corn. Just focus on the neonics, because the problem seems to be the crash in our insect populations from the neonics effect. There are other things causing insect problems, but if we know this is something that places all over the world are saying we should get rid of this, why don't we just focus on this one part of our corn situation, soybeans, and not try to get the farmers to change everything at once?
I appreciate that perspective. And I appreciate that if you start now, you might be able to have enough conversations with enough seed men and find out, whether or not your leasees would sort of agree and say, okay, we can look for that. We can look for treated seed. We can look for a hybrid that's got the kind of traits in it that we're comfortable with and we actually feel like we have success growing with. that doesn't add, more challenges to us. And we can see if we can secure that, without a neonic seed treatment. And to be honest, that's a message that I feel comfortable saying to people. If you could do that and you can find it, the leasee is not going to lose. I'll bet they won't lose 2% yields, 1% yields to the few insects that might nibble on, that. I'm just saying, and no, this isn't my area. I just don't know how easy it is to source that in hybrid corn. In soybeans, it'll be a little bit easier. Actually, I shared a online paper with Doug, and if Doug